Plantation records from Louisiana's sugar country contain an entry that still baffles medical experts. A woman in bondage delivered 3 living children in one night. Something so rare most doctors of that time had never seen it. But the birth itself wasn't what made this extraordinary. What occurred 72 hours later would be documented in letters witnessed by multiple people and whispered about for decades in both slave quarters and plantation houses. The decision made that week defied every maternal instinct, violated the natural order, and left a haunting question for anyone who examines the evidence. When survival demands the unthinkable, can we truly judge the choice? Before we go on with what happened at Belle Riviere Plantation in the spring of 1847, I need you to do something. Hit subscribe, because stories like this, real, documented cases history tried to bury, don't just vanish on their own. And leave a comment telling me what state or city you're listening from. I want to know where in America people still care about these hidden truths. What happened next would force everyone involved to confront a question no one should ever have to answer. Belle Riviere Plantation sat along a bend in Bayou Lush, 30 miles south of Donaldsonville, where the water moved slow and dark through fields stretching toward the Gulf. The main house rose 3 stories, white columns holding up galleries where the Arsenault family took their evening air when the heat grew unbearable. Behind it, the sugar mill's brick chimney stood like a finger pointing at God. And beyond that, 2 rows of cabins housed the 87 people who made the Arsenault fortune possible. In April of 1847, Louisiana sugar was worth more than cotton. Planters like Etienne Arsenault understood that enslaved people represented not just labor, but investment. A healthy woman of childbearing age could be valued at $1,200. Her children would add to that value from their first breath. Arsenault kept meticulous records, births, deaths, illnesses, sales, purchases, in leather-bound ledgers his wife, Marie-Therese, sometimes reviewed when managing household accounts. Among those 87 souls was a woman the records listed simply as Delphine, age 24, house servant, light complexion, valued at $1,400. The extra $200 in her valuation came from her appearance and position. She worked in the main house, serving meals, cleaning chambers, assisting Madame Arsenault with her toilette. This proximity meant better food, lighter work than the fields, and a small cabin shared with only one other woman. It also meant visibility. Everything Delphine did happened under someone's watch. Her pregnancy became apparent in December 1846, noted clinically in the records, Delphine with child due approximately April. The father wasn't listed, but anyone at Belle Riviere more than a season understood the mathematics of a house servant's pregnancy. Some things didn't require documentation. Delphine worked through the winter, her belly swelling beneath her simple dresses. Marie-Therese Arsenault, a devout Catholic who attended Mass every Sunday at St. Philomena's in Donaldsonville, took particular interest. She'd lost 2 children to fever in infancy and had no living sons to inherit Belle Riviere. When she looked at Delphine's expanding form, she saw potential. Another child born on the plantation, another piece of property, another investment. "You're carrying large," she told Delphine one morning in March, her hand resting briefly on the swell. "Perhaps twins. Dr. Brossard should examine you before your time." Dr. Louis Brossard traveled from Donaldsonville twice monthly to tend to the Arsenault family and, occasionally, to enslaved people whose value justified the expense. He arrived on April 3, his medical bag worn smooth from years of house calls throughout Ascension Parish. The examination took place in Delphine's cabin. Dr. Brossard pressed his hands against her abdomen, his brow furrowing. He listened with his wooden stethoscope, counting heartbeats. When he emerged, Madame Arsenault waited on the narrow porch. "Well?" she asked. "3, he said simply. 3 distinct heartbeats. I've only seen this twice in my career, and neither pregnancy ended with living children. The chances of all 3 surviving are extraordinarily slim, madam. The mother herself faces considerable danger." Marie-Therese's expression shifted, calculation visible. If they live, they would be mulatto children. Light, like their mother. Such children have value, Dr. Brossard. If they survive, madam. I urge you to prepare for disappointment. But preparation took many forms at Belle Riviere. That evening, Etienne Arsenault made an entry in his ledger, April 3, 1847. Delphine expected to deliver 3 children, possibly viable if light. Assess and decide allocation per market value, *. The words assess and decide allocation would later become the center of everything. Ominous somber music. April 14 arrived with unseasonable warmth. The air hung thick with bayou moisture, and by late afternoon, thunderclouds built to the south, turning the sky the color of a bruise. Delphine's labor began just after supper dishes were cleared. The other women brought her to her cabin. They sent word to the main house, and Dr. Brossard was summoned from Donaldsonville, though everyone knew he wouldn't arrive in time. A woman named Ruth, who delivered dozens of babies in the quarters over 48 years, took charge. What happened over the next 7 hours would be documented in fragments: Ruth's later testimony, Dr. Brossard's notes, a letter from Marie-Therese to her sister in New Orleans. The labor was difficult. Ruth later said she'd never seen anything like it. 3 children trying to enter the world at once, each fighting against the others. The first baby arrived just after midnight. A girl, small but breathing, her skin the color of fresh cream with the faintest amber undertone. Ruth wrapped her in clean cotton and laid her in a basket near the fire. The second came 20 minutes later, another girl, smaller and darker, with thick black hair already visible. She came out silent, and Ruth worked to get her breathing, turning her upside down, rubbing her back until a thin wail emerged. The third took another hour. By the time this baby, a boy, finally arrived, Delphine had lost consciousness from exhaustion. The boy was the darkest of the 3, his skin a deeper bronze. He was also the smallest, barely 5 pounds, his cry weaker than his sister's. When Dr. Brossard arrived at dawn, he found 3 living babies and a mother alive but depleted. He examined each infant, noting their sizes, breathing, color, vigor. "Remarkable," he murmured to Ruth. "All 3 alive. I didn't think it possible." "God makes possible what he wants," Ruth said quietly. But it wasn't God's will determining what happened next. It was arithmetic. Etienne Arsenault arrived at the cabin mid-morning with his wife. They stood in the doorway, looking at the 3 baskets near the fire, each containing a tiny human being that represented both miracle and commodity. Marie-Therese moved from basket to basket, studying each child with the attention she gave to evaluating fabric in Donaldsonville. "The first girl," she said finally. "She's the lightest. She could pass for white in certain company." "That makes her valuable," Etienne agreed. "Very valuable, especially as she grows. House service, perhaps ladies' maid work. Premium positioning." "And the others?" Etienne's expression remained neutral, but his words carried weight. "Darker children are more difficult to place domestically. Fieldwork is their future, which means their value caps lower. 3 infants represent 3 times the resources, milk, care, time away from work for the mother. The return on investment must be calculated carefully." Dr. Brossard cleared his throat. "Monsieur Arsenault, these are newborns. They require their mother." "All 3? Etienne's question hung in the air. "Doctor, you yourself said multiple births rarely produce 3 viable children. Nature has a way of selecting the strongest. Perhaps we should allow nature to continue that selection." Marie-Therese touched her husband's arm. "Etienne, we cannot simply, we are Catholic people. Father Duchamp would." "Father Duchamp deals in souls, my dear. I deal in property. These are separate matters." He turned to Dr. Brossard. "How many children can a woman in Delphine's condition reasonably nurse and keep alive?" The doctor's discomfort was visible. 1, perhaps 2 if she's strong and well-fed. 3 would be unlikely to all survive, even under the best circumstances. The smallest, the boy, is particularly fragile. Then medical reality supports a practical decision." Etienne looked down at Delphine, who was beginning to stir. "She can keep the lightest child, the one with the best future. The other 2 must go elsewhere." "Elsewhere?" Marie-Therese's voice dropped to a whisper. "I know a man in Napoleonville. He deals in difficult situations, unmarketable property, children too young for regular markets. He'll take them, no questions asked, for a small fee. They'll be placed somewhere. Or perhaps not. That's not our concern. Dr. Brossard stepped forward. Monsieur, I must protest. Your protest is noted and dismissed. You've delivered the children. Your work here is complete. Etienne's voice carried the finality of a man who'd made countless such decisions. Delphine will be informed when she wakes. She has until Sunday morning, 3 days, to say goodbye to the two who will leave. I am not without mercy. I'm giving her time to accept the reality. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. The lightest one stays. That's the decision documented in your records, Doctor. Note that we kept the most viable child. That's the truth of the matter, after all. Somber, mournful music. When Delphine fully regained consciousness an hour later, Ruth had to tell her. The sound from Delphine's throat wasn't a scream or a sob. It was something more fundamental, more ancient, the sound of a mother understanding her children would be torn apart, and there was nothing she could do. The 3 days that followed became a study in impossible mathematics. How do you divide a mother's love into 3 parts when you know 2 parts will be taken? How do you say goodbye to children who haven't yet fully opened their eyes? Delphine spent those 72 hours in her cabin, dismissed from main house duties. The other women brought food she didn't eat, offered comfort that couldn't penetrate her grief. They brought cloth for simple gowns, boiled water for washing. They did the small, practical things life requires, even when life has become unbearable. Ruth stayed almost constantly. She'd seen children sold away before, a permanent horror over every enslaved mother's existence, but never at 3 days old. Never triplets. Never a mother forced to choose by proximity and care which child would live a life she could witness. You got to feed all 3 while you can, Ruth told Delphine on the second day. Your milk is coming in strong. Don't let them go hungry just because they're leaving. But that was the cruelty. Delphine had to care for all 3 equally while knowing the care was temporary for 2. She had to memorize faces that hadn't yet fully formed, count fingers and toes that might walk roads she'd never see, breathe in their scent, that particular sweetness of new skin, and know it would fade from memory. The lightest child, who would stay, nursed vigorously, her tiny fists clenching against Delphine's skin. The second daughter, darker, was fussier, struggling to latch as if already protesting her future. The boy remained smallest, quietest, sleeping most of those 3 days as if he'd already given up. On Friday evening, Marie-Therese Arsenault came to the cabin. She brought a dress she no longer wore, good cotton with a few moth holes. For the baby's christening gown, she said, her voice forced bright. The one who's staying should be baptized properly. Father Duchamp can come next week. Delphine looked up from where she sat with all 3 babies. And the others, madam? Do they not deserve baptism? Marie-Therese's face tightened. That's not my decision, Delphine. My husband has made arrangements. I tried to persuade him differently, but she stopped, perhaps realizing sharing marital disagreements with an enslaved woman was inappropriate. The dress is for the child who stays. That's all. After she left, Ruth took the dress. She fought for you in her way. Madam sometimes has kindness in her. But kindness don't change property law. Kindness don't change what men decide. Saturday brought heavy, relentless rain, turning paths between cabins into rivers of red mud. Delphine watched water run past her doorway and thought about the bayou bordering the plantation, about how easy it would be to walk into that dark water with all 3 children and simply not come back out. The thought came clearly, without drama, a simple equation. If all 3 would die, at least they would die together in her arms. Ruth saw the direction of her gaze. Don't, she said sharply. Don't you dare think it. You got 1 baby who needs you to live. 1 out of 3 is better than none out of 3. You hear me? Is it? Delphine's voice was hollow. Is it better? They'll grow up wondering if they had a mother. They'll grow up wondering why they weren't wanted. They were wanted. They are wanted. But wanting don't matter when you're property. You know that. I know you know that. Which one do I give more to tonight, Ruth? Which one do I hold longer? How do I choose that? You don't choose. You hold them all the same. You love them all the same. And you remember that the two who leave still got the first 3 days with their mama. Some children born into slavery don't get 3 minutes. You gave them 3 days. That's something. But 3 days against a lifetime felt like nothing. Eerie, tense music. Sunday morning arrived with clearing skies and a knock at dawn. Etienne Arsenault didn't enter himself. He sent the overseer, Thibodeaux, who handled unpleasant aspects of plantation management. Thibodeaux brought a wagon and another man, someone Delphine didn't recognize, a face she'd spend the rest of her life trying to forget. Time, Thibodeaux said. He had the decency not to meet her eyes. Delphine had dressed the two departing children in the simple gowns the women had made. She'd fed them one last time. She'd sung to them a song her own mother had sung before she'd been sold away at age 12, a song in a language she didn't remember learning but knew in her bones. The stranger stepped forward, holding out his arms for the first baby. Names, he asked. They don't have names yet, Thibodeaux said. Just take them. Wait. Delphine's voice stopped everyone. She looked down at the darker daughter, the one who'd been fussy, the one who'd fought. Her name is Beatrice. She looked at the boy. He is called Christophe. The stranger nodded, took Beatrice first. She started crying immediately, a thin wail cutting through the morning air. Then he took Christophe, who remained silent, eyes closed, chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Delphine held the remaining child so tightly Ruth had to touch her arm gently. Careful, baby. You'll hurt her. The wagon pulled away, Thibodeaux driving, the stranger sitting in back, a baby in each arm, wrapped in gowns that would probably be taken and sold separately before noon. Delphine stood in the cabin doorway, her remaining daughter in her arms, and watched until the wagon disappeared beyond the sugar mill, heading north toward Napoleonville. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there, memorizing the empty space where her children had been. Ruth finally led her back inside. What are you going to name this one? She asked, trying to redirect Delphine's attention to the living child she still held. Delphine looked down at the lightest baby, the one chosen for survival because her skin color promised better market value, because her potential as a house servant outweighed her siblings' futures in the fields. This child, selected by the accident of her complexion, the luck of genetics that put slightly less melanin in her skin. Clementine, Delphine said finally. Her name is Clementine. That's a beautiful name. It means mercy. Delphine's voice was flat. It's a lie. But it's her name. Melancholy, reflective music. The weeks after the separation created a routine built on absence. Delphine returned to work after 2 weeks, Clementine strapped to her back. Marie-Therese permitted this, it kept the child visible, accustomed to household rhythms where she would one day serve. But something in Delphine had calcified. The other servants noticed. She moved with mechanical efficiency, no warmth, no small conversations, no songs hummed while polishing silver. She fed Clementine, changed her, kept her clean. But there was a quality of going through motions, of performing motherhood rather than inhabiting it. She don't talk to that baby the way a mother should, one woman said to Ruth when Clementine was 6 weeks old. She takes care of her needs, but she don't seem to love her. Ruth understood. Part of her went away in that wagon. When you lose 2 children, the third one is a reminder of what's gone. Every time she looks at Clementine, she sees Beatrice and Christophe. That's a hard weight. But there was more, a question Delphine turned over during long hours of housework. What had happened to them? The stranger hadn't given a name. Thibodeaux claimed not to know. Napoleonville could mean anywhere. Could mean they'd been passed further, sold separately, died within days and buried in unmarked graves. Not knowing was its own torture. In June, Delphine did something that could have gotten her severely punished. She asked Etienne Arsenault directly what had become of her other children. He looked up from his ledger. They were placed appropriately for their value. That's all you need to know. Are they alive? That's not your concern, Delphine. You have a healthy daughter to raise. Focus on her. Focus on your work. These questions are inappropriate. I'm their mother. You are property asking about property. The discussion is over. But the discussion wasn't over in Delphine's mind. She noticed things: how Marie-Therese avoided looking at Clementine directly, how Dr. Brossard on monthly visits asked about the baby's health but never mentioned the other two, how the whole household moved around the subject like mourners avoiding a fresh grave. In July, something changed. A woman arrived from a neighboring plantation delivering preserves Madame Arsenault had requested. Her name was Therese, and she worked in the kitchen of the Boudreau plantation 15 miles upriver. While waiting, her eyes fell on Clementine. "That's a light baby you got there," Therese said. "She the only one?" Something in her tone made Delphine look up sharply. "Why do you ask?" Therese glanced toward the door. "Because there's talk along the bayou. People talk about a man from Napoleonville who had twin babies for sale back in April. Dark infants, said they came from Belle Riviere. Said they were born 3 at once and the lightest one was kept." Delphine's heart stopped. Twins. There were 3. He only had 2, according to what I heard. A girl and a boy. Somebody bought them together, unusual. Usually they separate siblings for more profit. But these went together to a family up north of Thibodaux. What family? I don't know the name. But I know someone who might. If you ever get to Napoleonville, there's a free woman of color named Josephine LeBlanc who runs a boarding house. She knows everyone, hears everything. If anyone knows where those babies went, it's her. Before Delphine could ask more, Marie-Therese entered the kitchen, and the conversation ended. But the information burned: 2 babies sold together to a family north of Thibodaux. Beatrice and Christophe might be alive, together, only 25 miles away, a distance that might as well have been the moon for an enslaved woman. That night, Delphine lay in her cabin with Clementine sleeping beside her. She made a decision. It would take time, require careful planning. But she would find out what happened to her children, even if it took years, even if it cost her everything. What she didn't know was that finding the answer would reveal a truth more disturbing than anything she'd imagined. Suspenseful music. Autumn came with brief relief from heat. Clementine grew stronger, her delicate beauty developing as Marie-Therese had predicted. By 6 months, she was sitting up, reaching with focused determination. The women agreed she'd be beautiful, and in the calculus of slavery, beauty meant value, and value meant attention. Not all of it welcome. Delphine began learning the routes. Every plantation existed within a network: supply deliveries, produce sales, church gatherings, doctor's visits, social calls. These movements created tiny windows for information, for quiet questions. She learned Thibodaux made a monthly trip to Napoleonville for supplies, sometimes taking an enslaved man to help load the wagon. If someone could get into that wagon, someone might speak to Josephine LeBlanc. In November, opportunity arrived unexpectedly. Dr. Brossard needed an assistant for a difficult delivery near Napoleonville. Marie-Therese suggested Delphine. She's learned enough from Ruth, she told her husband. House servants with medical skills are more valuable. Dr. Brossard can supervise. Thibodaux can drive them. The trip was arranged for November 18th. Delphine had 5 days to plan what she'd do with precious hours in Napoleonville. She couldn't be obvious, couldn't risk ending her search before it began. But she might slip away for a few minutes, ask the right questions, learn something. The delivery was long and difficult. A woman labored 14 hours before producing a stillborn son. By the time they finished, night had fallen. Thibodaux declared they'd stay overnight. Delphine was given a pallet in the kitchen of a small inn. The back door had only a simple latch. She waited until she was sure Thibodaux and Dr. Brossard were asleep, then slipped out into the November night. A free black man directed her to a 2-story house painted yellow with green shutters, Josephine LeBlanc's boarding house. Josephine opened the door, tall, elegant, hair wrapped in silk. "I don't have rooms available," she began. "I'm not looking for a room," Delphine interrupted. "I'm looking for information about 2 babies sold here in April. A girl and a boy, dark complexion, born at Belle Riviere. I'm their mother." Josephine's expression shifted. She stepped aside. "Come in." Quickly. In the parlor, Josephine said, "I remember. Everyone in Napoleonville remembers. Triplets, and the lightest one kept. The man who brought the other 2 was named Monsieur Gaspard. He deals in problematic property, infants too young for fieldwork, children with defects. He finds solutions." "Where did they go?" "To a family named Hébert up near Thibodeau. They own a small farm, grow tobacco mostly. They needed children who could work in a few years. They took both babies together because it was cheaper than buying one older child. $30 for the pair. That's what I heard. $30, her children sold for less than a decent horse. Are they alive?" Josephine hesitated. "I don't know. That was 7 months ago. Infant mortality is high, especially for babies that young separated from their mother. But the Heberts are Catholic. They attend St. Joseph's Church. They're not known for cruelty. At least not by local standards. If the baby survived, they'd be with the Heberts still." "Where exactly?" "I can't tell you that. If I give you directions and you run and you're caught, they'll come back to me. I can't risk that. I'm not running. I just need to know they're alive." "Why? What good does knowing do?" "You can't get them back. Because I need to know if I abandoned living children or dead ones. I need to know if they're breathing somewhere, if they're growing, if they remember anything about the 3 days before they were taken. I need to know something, Madame LeBlanc." Josephine stood, walked to a desk, took out paper and pencil, wrote something, folded it carefully. "This is a map. It shows how to get to the Hébert farm from Thibodeau. If you're ever in Thibodeau, if you ever have an hour free, you could walk there. You could see the farm. You could know." She handed the paper to Delphine. "But I never gave this to you. If anyone asks, you never came here. Understand?" "I understand. And Delphine, if you find them alive, don't try to take them. They'll hunt you down, kill you, and your children will end up scattered to 3 different plantations, none with their mother. Sometimes knowing is all we get. It's not enough. But it's all there is." Delphine left with the folded map hidden in her dress. She made it back to the inn before dawn, slipped onto her pallet, and lay there watching the ceiling lighten, her heart pounding with the weight of what she now knew. Beatrice and Christophe might be alive. They were 25 miles away. The distance was impossible and might as well have been nothing. Hopeful, tense music. The opportunity to get to Thibodeau came in March 1848, 11 months after the triplets' birth. Marie-Thérese's sister Adelaide fell ill, and the family was summoned to her house in Thibodeau. Marie-Thérèse chose Delphine to accompany her, partly for her skills, partly because Clementine, now nearly 1, had become her favorite child on the plantation. They traveled by carriage, arriving on a Tuesday afternoon. Adelaide's house sat in town, close to the church. Proximity to town meant more movement, more potential for brief invisibility. On the 3rd day, Marie-Thérèse sent Delphine to the apothecary with a list. "This will take some time," the proprietor said. "Come back in 2 hours." 2 hours, more time than she dared hope. The map led her out of Thibodeau along a road paralleling a small creek. She passed farms, a few people looking but not stopping her. A black woman walking with a baby wasn't unusual enough to warrant questions. The distinctive split oak tree appeared after 40 minutes of walking, cleaved by lightning but still living. The Hébert farm lay just beyond it. Delphine stopped behind the scarred trunk, hand pressed against it, and stared. In the yard near a garden, 2 children. The right age, just under a year. One larger, moving with more confidence. The smaller one crawled more than walked, pulling up on the garden fence. Dark hair on both. Brown skin that caught the afternoon light differently than Clementine's lighter tones. A woman emerged from the house, white, middle-aged, work dress stained. She called out, and both children turned. The larger child, it had to be Beatrice, picked up a stick, waved it, laughed. The sound carried, high and clear. Delphine felt tears blur her vision. On her back, Clementine stirred. The smaller child, Christophe, crawled toward his sister, pulled himself up using her dress for balance. For a moment they stood together, leaning into each other, a unit. They had each other. In the arithmetic of slavery's cruelties, that was something. Madame Hébert called again, scooped up Christophe, gestured for Beatrice to follow. All three disappeared into the house. Delphine stood there 15 minutes, memorizing everything, the weathered gray wood of the house, the barn's sagging roof, the garden's rough-cut fence, the oak's lightning scar, the curve of the road. Every detail precious. She wanted to run to them. The impulse was physical. She could cross those 50 yards, call their names, show them Clementine, tell them who she was. But Josephine's warning echoed, if you try to take them, they'll kill you, and your children will end up scattered. Running wouldn't save them. It would guarantee all three would lose her permanently. The mathematics were cruel but clear. So Delphine did what enslaved mothers had done for generations. She made the impossible choice to walk away because walking away was the only way to protect them, even if the protection was only maintaining the fragile status quo of their survival. She turned from the split oak and walked back to Thibodeau. She collected the medicines exactly 2 hours after leaving, returned to Adelaide's house. You were gone quite some time, Marie-Therese observed. The apothecary was busy, madam. He had to prepare the camphor tincture fresh. Very well. No one suspected. The 2 hours that changed everything were, to everyone else, simply 2 unremarkable hours. That night, sleeping on a pallet with Clementine beside her, Delphine allowed herself to feel the full weight. Her children were alive. Together. Appearing healthy. The Heberts weren't beating or starving them. But they also weren't hers. They'd grow up calling someone else by whatever name they used for a mother. They'd have no memory of the 3 days she held them. The victory of knowing they lived was inseparable from the defeat of knowing they'd never know she cared enough to find them. She pulled Clementine closer. This daughter she could hold, who knew her voice, her smell. This daughter would grow up with her, hear stories, learn things mothers teach. But teaching Clementine would mean teaching her about the siblings she'd been separated from, ensuring at least one person knew the truth. Delphine made a decision that night. She would tell Clementine the truth when old enough. She would make sure the names Beatrice and Christophe were spoken, remembered, kept alive. It wasn't justice. It wasn't reunion. It was the only form of resistance available, refusing to let her children's existence be erased. Time passage music. Delphine returned to Belle Rivière, and life continued. The seasons turned. Sugarcane grew, was cut, processed. The Arsenault family prospered. Children were born in the quarters, some died, others sold away. Through all this, Delphine performed her duties with mechanical efficiency. She raised Clementine with careful attention, teaching her skills that would make her valuable, behaviors that would keep her safe, the invisible knowledge every enslaved person had to master. Knowing her other children lived changed the mathematics of her grief. It wasn't better or worse, different, more complex, layered with the strange comfort of confirmed existence alongside the pain of permanent separation. The years accumulated. Clementine grew beautiful. By 3, she helped with small tasks in the main house. By 5, Marie-Therese began teaching her to read, an unusual choice defended on practical grounds. A literate house servant had increased value. Delphine observed with mixed feelings. Literacy was power. It was also visibility. She encouraged Clementine's learning, adding her own lessons in the evenings. She taught her to be observant, to notice details others missed, to remember stories precisely. She taught her that light complexion was both advantage and burden. When Clementine turned 6, old enough to understand permanence, Delphine told her about Beatrice and Christophe. They sat in the cabin one evening in early April 1853, 6 years almost to the day after the triplets' birth. "You have a sister and a brother," Delphine said quietly. "Born the same night as you. They look different, darker skin, different features, but they're your blood. They live on a farm near Thibodeau with people named Hébert." Clementine's hand stopped mid-letter. "Why don't they live here?" "Because the people who own us decided you were more valuable. Your skin is lighter, and light skin means more money when you're property. So they kept you and sent Beatrice and Christophe away 3 days after you were all born. But I need you to know they exist. I need you to know their names. I need you to remember that you came into this world with 2 other people, and part of you is always going to be incomplete without them. Can we go see them?" The question pierced Delphine's heart. "No, baby. Enslaved people can't just travel where we want. But I have seen them. When you were 1, I walked to that farm and saw them playing in a yard. They were alive and together. I watched them as long as I could, memorized everything so I could tell you someday. Do they know about me? No. They don't know they have a sister. They probably don't know they were born as triplets. The Heberts might have told them they came from Belle Riviere, but that's all. They don't know the truth, and they might never know unless someone tells them. Will you tell them?" "I can't. I'll probably never see them again. But I'm telling you, and you're going to remember. When you're older, if you're ever free, if you ever have the chance, you find them. You tell them they had a mother who loved them. You tell them they have a sister who knows they exist. You tell them that for 3 days they were held and fed and sung to, and they weren't abandoned because they weren't wanted. They were taken because of the color of their skin. And that's different. That matters. Do you understand?" Clementine nodded slowly. At 6, she couldn't grasp the full horror, but she absorbed the essential truth. She had siblings, alive somewhere. Remembering them was important. That conversation became a ritual. Every few months, Delphine added details, descriptions of the Hébert farm, the split oak, how Beatrice laughed waving a stick, how Christophe pulled himself up using his sister's dress. She repeated the names until etched into Clementine's memory. She made the absent siblings real through the only power available: storytelling, repetition, insistence they mattered. Aging, wistful music. The years passed with increasing weight. Delphine aged in the way enslaved people aged, faster, worn down by labor and compounded grief. A cough in her 30s never fully left. By 40, she moved slowly, joints stiff. By 45, no longer valuable enough for house service, she was reassigned to the kitchen gardens. This demotion brought unexpected relief. Garden work meant less visibility, less supervision, more hours to simply exist. Her hands, which had served elegant meals, now worked directly in soil. There was something honest about it. Clementine became what the Arsenaults envisioned, a skilled, literate house servant whose light complexion and refined manners made her suitable for hiring out to wealthy families in New Orleans. At 16, she made her first journey, accompanying Marie-Therese as a lady's maid during the winter of 1863. The timing was significant. The Civil War raged. New Orleans had fallen to Union forces in April 1862, but sugar parishes remained largely under Confederate control. Wealthy families clung to antebellum rituals. In New Orleans, Clementine met Auguste Rousseau, a freeman of color, a carpenter doing repairs for Garden District families. The free black community in New Orleans was substantial and complex, people of mixed race occupying an ambiguous social position, owning property, running businesses. They met when he came to repair gallery railing. Their conversations were cautious, conducted in stolen moments. But something built between them. Auguste recognized in Clementine the intelligence slavery tried to suppress. Clementine recognized in Auguste a vision of what freedom might actually mean. "I'm saving money," Auguste told her one evening in the mansion's courtyard. "In a few years, I'll have enough to buy someone's freedom. Prices have changed with the war. Some owners are willing to sell now. If you were for sale, if I could negotiate with the Arsenault family. I have family, Clementine interrupted. She told him the story, the triplets, the separation, the walk to the Hébert farm. Auguste listened, his expression acknowledging a story unique in details, common in essential truth. Every enslaved person had a version. If I help you, he said slowly. If I find a way to learn about those children, to discover if they're still at that farm, if they're still alive, would you want to know? Even if the answer is painful. Yes. Not knowing is worse than any truth. Auguste kept his promise, though war complicated everything. Over 2 years, he made careful inquiries through networks of free black people and enslaved travelers, piecing together the story from scattered details. In early 1865, just months before war's end, he came to Clementine with news. Christophe is dead, he said quietly. He died when he was 4. Fever took him. But Beatrice is alive. She's still at the Hébert farm. She's 21, never been sold away. The Héberts aren't wealthy enough to sell property they've had since infancy. They need the labor too much. Delphine was 41 by then, her cough chronic, her body worn. When Clementine told her, Delphine wept for the first time since the separation, for Christophe, carried and birthed and held for 3 days and never known beyond that, for Beatrice, alive and grown, a stranger. I want you to promise me something, Delphine said when tears stopped. When I'm gone, if you ever get free, you find her. You tell her everything. You tell her she had a brother and a mother and a sister. You tell her the truth. You don't let her spend her life thinking she was abandoned for no reason. Promise me. I promise, Mama. Somber, final music. Delphine died in early 1864, lungs finally giving out. Buried in the small cemetery behind slave quarters at Belle Riviere, her grave marked by a wooden cross that would rot within a decade. The Civil War ended in 1865. Enslaved people at Belle Riviere were freed by the 13th Amendment, though freedom came with complications: no land, no resources, no education, no protection from Reconstruction violence. Clementine stayed initially because she had nowhere else. But in 1866, she married Auguste, who came to find her. They moved to New Orleans, where his carpentry business provided a modest living. It took Clementine 3 more years to save enough for the trip to Thibodeau. She went in 1869, 24 years old, Auguste accompanying her for safety. They found the Hébert farm exactly where Josephine Leblanc's map indicated. Beatrice was still there, 26, working as a sharecropper on the same land where she'd been enslaved. Debt bound her almost as effectively as slavery had. Clementine approached her in the field. Auguste stood a respectful distance back. "Are you Beatrice?" Clementine asked. The woman looked up, suspicion immediate. "Who's asking?" "My name is Clementine. I was born April 14, 1847, at Belle Riviere Plantation. I was one of 3 children born that night. I think you were another." Beatrice straightened slowly. Taller, darker-skinned, features different but familiar in the shape of her eyes, line of her jaw. "I was told I had a sister who was kept at the plantation. Lighter skin, they said. That's why she stayed and we were sold." "That's true. But it wasn't our mother's choice. She was forced, and she spent the rest of her life trying to find out what happened to you and your brother. Christophe died when we were 4. I know. I'm sorry." They stood in the tobacco field, 2 women sharing blood and birth but nothing else, not memories, not experiences, not the 1,000 small moments that make siblings family. "Our mother's name was Delphine," Clementine said. "She died 5 years ago. But before she died, she made me promise to find you and tell you the truth. You weren't abandoned because you weren't wanted. You were taken because of your skin color. She named you Beatrice. She named your brother Christophe. She held you for 3 days, fed you, sang to you. And she walked all the way from Thibodeau to this farm when you were 11 months old just to see if you were alive. She stood behind that oak tree over there and watched you play in the yard with Christophe. She never forgot you. Not for one day of her life. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. I don't remember her. I know. But now you know she existed. You know she loved you. And you know that the 3 days you had with her, she gave you everything she could. They talked an hour, filling gaps of 26 years. Beatrice had no interest leaving the Hebert farm, the only home she remembered. Madame Hebert had been kinder than many slave owners, a low bar but something. She agreed to stay in touch, write letters when she could, maintain the connection their mother worked so hard to preserve. Clementine and Auguste returned to New Orleans. They had 3 children over the next decade. Clementine named her first daughter Delphine, her first son Christophe. She told her children the story of the triplets, the separation, the mathematics of skin color that determined their fates. She made sure they knew family wasn't just who you grew up with, it was who you came from, who you remembered, who you refused to forget. Closing reflective music. This story doesn't have a happy ending because stories like this don't get happy endings. Delphine died never reunited with 2 of her children. Christophe died at 4, knowing nothing of his mother or sisters. Beatrice spent childhood and young adulthood believing she'd been unwanted, abandoned for being too dark. But Clementine kept her promise. The truth was told. The names were remembered. The 3 days when they'd all been together, when Delphine held all 3 babies and loved them equally before the world forced her to choose, became part of family history passed down through generations. Sometimes that's all we can do, remember, tell the truth, refuse to let the people who were erased stay erased. This mystery shows us the cruelest choices are made by systems, not individuals, and that a mother's love persists even when everything else is taken away. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed? Leave your comment below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries. See you in the next video.